This is the Roots and All podcast, and I'm your host, Sarah Wilson. Join me as I talk about all aspects of gardening with some of the top horticulturists from around the world. Welcome to a special remastered edition of Roots and All, where I visit a conversation that feels more urgent today than ever. In this episode, originally aired in 2019, I'm speaking with Mary Reynolds, renowned landscape designer, author and founder of the rewilding movement We Are The Ark. It's particularly pertinent as it coincides with the start of the RHS Chelsea Flower Show, where Mary won a gold medal for her groundbreaking naturalistic garden, which at the time was a revelation. Mary has long championed a shift from conventional gardening to a more nature-centric approach. Her initiative, We Are The Ark, invites gardeners, landowners and stewards to rewild areas under their care, transforming them into sanctuaries for biodiversity. This conversation delves into Mary's journey, the philosophy behind We Are The Ark, and practical steps we can all take to support nature in our own spaces. As we face increasing environmental challenges, Mary's insight offers a timely reminder of the power each of us holds to make a difference. Whether you have a sprawling garden or a small balcony, this episode provides inspiration and guidance on creating your own ark for nature.
So I went to college to do garden design. Didn't want to go, but my parents, in retrospect, very kindly insisted I went to college, and I fancied a guy doing landscape design. And so that was my big calling. And I went and did that course in Youth City in Dublin, which took 4 years. And it turned out I was really good at design, but I didn't particularly enjoy it, and I lost the will to live pretty soon after starting. And I was designing gardens around the Dublin area for a few years, and then I moved back to the countryside in Wicklow County, which is down beneath Dublin, and I lived in the mountains in a little tiny cottage. And I found my connection to nature again, which I'd had when I was a kid, when I grew up in Wexford in the southeast of Ireland. And I kind of realised I didn't want to keep doing what I was doing. So I kind of realised that nature was the real deal, and gardens were a very pale imitation of what we kept trying to change to make some kind of an idea of beauty that we had morphed in our minds as being the only ideal. And actually, the only true beauty is natural, nature. And so very obvious to me at the time that there was something seriously wrong the way we were doing this. So I still hadn't really worked it out, but I knew I had to do something different. So I decided to build gardens based on wild places and native plants. But nobody would let me build a garden that was kind of like a bunch of weeds. So I applied to do a garden at the Chelsea Flower Show in London because I hadn't heard of anywhere else. And it occurred to me that maybe if I did a showcase that I could maybe change the way we were working with land in our gardens. So there was a big story behind that, and I went ahead and it happened. It was quite a magical story. And then that kind of changed the fashion as such in garden design. It kind of made wild gardens fashionable. And that sounds kind of like a small thing, but fashion seems to have an influence on culture in many ways, you know? So it brought it into the consciousness of people that actually wildness is valid and that we don't really have to keep fighting against nature all the time. So anyway, that brought me into an international career where I designed gardens like that everywhere. And then a movie was made about that period of my life, and I decided to write a book to go along with that. I wrote myself out of a job, basically, because I realized that although all these gardens I was making were beautiful and they were designed in harmony with the shapes and patterns of nature, and they didn't block the flow of universal energy, and they had a very magical quality to them, the gardens and the land themselves did not want to stay as I had designed them. They wanted to grow and morph and change into something else, and I was still forcing them to stay in a particular shape and size that I had imagined. So I realized that everything I was doing was rubbish, and I sat back and tried to reimagine it again. And so I wrote a book called The Garden Awakening, based on kind of a practical book to help people create gardens that allow the land to become what it wanted to become, and still getting something for ourselves out of it in the culture that we live in. So that made a lot of sense, and it changed the way I work. And something happened then about a year ago or less. I was sitting at my desk here. I rent a property in Ireland, and I have a lot of land, luckily not a lot, like about 5 acres. So near where I live, which I'm trying to build a house on, just taking me a little while. I've been planting up trees and for years, and a big massive orchard. And I was sitting at my desk looking down over my rented property, half of which I've left to completely go wild. And luckily my landlord is really kind and understanding, and he gets what I'm at. A fox ran across the lawn in front of me, and then just after him a couple of hares. So this had my attention because normally it's the other way around. And so I kept looking, and pretty soon there was a little family of hedgehogs that scuttled across the hedge, underneath the hedge along the same path. And they're usually nocturnal animals. So I kind of thought this is like Noah's Ark, you know. So I went outside and went in the direction they were coming from. And at the end of my lane, across the road, was a field which had been a big thicket of life, brambles and hawthorns and blackthorns. It was impenetrable. And somebody had just bought the land, about an acre, to build a house at the top of the land. And they'd gone in and done what everybody does, which is to clear the whole land in an instant with a digger. And all of these creatures that we share the planet with, they had not been given any thought. Everybody thinks they'll live somewhere else, but they have nowhere else to go. They can't go to agricultural land. They're poisoned with chemicals and lack of habitat, and they take refuge in the wild patches that are left, very, very small patches, and our gardens, which we have morphed into something very unnatural and something tidy, which does not support life. So I stood there looking at this in absolute horror and realized I'd done the same thing myself so many times. And at that point, I realized I have to change everything again. So now I'm asking people to give at least half of any land they have, including the patch that their house sits on, give at least half of it back to nature, because we've taken too much and we have to give as much of it as possible back, and to allow it to rewild, because nature knows best what to plant there. We haven't a clue what we're at. Everything she needs is already in the ground. If we expose the earth and allow it to come through, or just leave it alone, depending on each patch of earth is different. Some of them can be left alone. Some of them might need a little bit of reboot for the ecosystem. But all I'm asking is that people put up a sign in their land saying this is an ark, and put the website underneath to explain to people what's happening. And this is an environmental movement, which is a wild growth movement. It's giving people hope, giving them something that they can do to actually impact the crisis that we're living in. And it's spreading like wildfire all over the earth. And there's arcs everywhere now. I only launched it in March, and the hope is that it's not dependent on me. It's a wild growth movement. It's a very, very simple movement. And I'm hoping that if enough of us do this, and you'll hear a lot of people saying, that won't make any difference. It's only a tiny little bit of garden. But actually, there's quite a lot of farms coming on board. I'm asking county councils, local governments to come on board. I'm asking schools to come on board. And we're creating a map of arcs now. And if we can connect them all up, it'll make a massive patchwork quilt, which will wrap its way around the globe. And it will shift the consciousness and change the level of understanding of connection we have and dependence we have on nature by doing absolutely nothing.
As you were talking, I was thinking I moved out of London down to Sussex, and long story short, I kind of share a property with my family, and we have a tiny little paddock. It's 3/4 of an acre, and my neighbours were grazing it. And I said to my mum, right, okay, that's it. I'm vegan. I don't really support the idea of us having these spring lambs on the paddock, knowing that they're going off to be killed. So can I take the paddock back and do what I want to do with it? So at the moment, the grass is coming through, everything's coming through. It's amazing to watch it. But I know that come autumn, I'm going to be expected to mow it. And it will be treated as a kind of hayfield almost, because if I were to let that land just do its own thing, not only would my mother be absolutely terrified, my neighbours would be horrified. You know, they keep their paddocks, which are adjacent, really closely mown. So how do you deal with that when people are scared of what nature can do? What do you say to them?
Well, the sign gets rid of that because people are afraid of being shamed. That's what they're afraid of. They're afraid that somebody will look in and say that this is disgraceful, that they're lazy, all those things. It's kind of a sense of belonging to the community. They don't want to be outcast. So if you put a sign in very, very clearly stating what you're doing, it instantly transforms that into a positive energy. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
If you mark your piece of land as an ark, you're suddenly doing something incredibly useful. And therefore, you remove that shame, which is the basis of the arguments that your mum would have, even though they may not want to admit it. That's where it comes from.
Mm-hmm.
But once you explain to them, simple stuff like we're losing 200 species to extinction every single day on the earth, the threads of the web of life are being pulled apart, and we are completely dependent on all these creatures we share the planet with to keep this system well and healthy so that we can continue to survive here. And at some point, we'll pull one too many threads, not too far in the future, and the whole thing will collapse. So actually, we have to step into a new role as one of guardian on the earth, not gardener, not farmer, guardian of the land. And we can still grow food in different ways. But George Monbiot termed a coin called sheep-wrecked. Land is all sheep-wrecked. There's too much sheep. All those highlands need to be rewilded so that we can rebalance the damage we're doing. I think we need to give at least half of the earth back to nature. And the other argument that, the amount we need all this land to grow food, that isn't valid if you grow food in a different way. The way NEP is growing food, NEP, the rewilding safari place in England, or regenerative farming, forest gardens. If we go back to working in harmony with nature and stop growing food like monocultural damaging processes and stop putting all this land over to grain to feed animals, we have to move over to a plant-based diet, but not in the old way. We have to transform it into a non-chemical regenerative plant-based diet, all of which is possible. But we can't do that unless there is some kind of a revolution. And the revolution has to be based on something gentle, and it has to come from the ground up, because the leaders are not going to make any changes. They absolutely can't. So we have to make the changes, and that will force them to change. And it's very difficult to be the black sheep in your family and stand up and say, hang on for a second. But that's actually what we all have to do. Hang on for a second, lads. We have about 10 years before everything falls apart. So we're in a massive crisis. And because people are looking out their windows and seeing a lovely sunny day, hearing some birds singing, they probably think everything's okay. But when was the last time you had to clean the insects off your car screen? When was the last time you opened your window at night and the light in the room attracted a flurry of moths into the room? If we keep pouring chemicals on the earth, we're going to kill all the earthworms, which are being wiped out. Their immune systems are depleted because they're getting attacked by invasive species. All of these things are causing huge ecological crisis. Without earthworms, we have about a year before we're wiped off the face of the earth. Mm-hmm. We depend on these creatures. Without bees, we're 4 years before we're wiped out. We actually need to look at these creatures as our gods almost. It's a wrong term. I don't want to make it religious because it's not. I just mean we need to be in service to nature. This is where we've gone wrong. For millennia, we lived in service to nature, and we understood that all life had massive consciousness and felt pain and joy. All the creatures that we live with, they're just as conscious and feeling as we are, including the rooted creatures, the plants, the trees. And we have to kill life to survive here. And it's a very painful reality. But if we accept that that's the truth and then become responsible and use gratitude and be of service in return, then everything comes back into balance.
So should we be growing food on our own plots?
Yes. I'm saying to people that in order to change the system, we have to step out of the industrial fishing and farming system, which is killing the planet, because that's basically what is killing the planet. We have to grow resilient, local, communities where we live in walkable communities where you can grow your own food or grow community food or support local organic farming communities and stop buying stuff basically and stop needing to jump on a plane to travel to get away from your life. We have to grow our own food because the system of food growing is in a major way responsible for the planet dying around us. So I'm saying to people, if they can, give half of it back to nature and use the other half to grow food and have a little bit of space for you and your family to hang out.
A lot of people nowadays are living in more urban areas and cities. If they don't have ownership or guardianship over a piece of land, what can they do?
So I'm asking people a couple of different things. One is they can get together as communities and try and raise money to buy land to create arks. If they can't manage that, if they can't buy land, certainly in smaller villages and towns, they can do that. They can go to farmers and buy land to create arks, half wild, half food growing for local communities, you know. In larger cities, you can go to your local councils, your local governments. They have so much land that is just wasteland. Just ask them. I mean, sometimes it's just a matter of asking, can we please take some of this land back? Can we take it and create community gardens, you know, sanctuaries for nature? Go to your local parks. There's so many areas of parks. There is absolutely no need for them to be maintained. They can ask the parks to put up signs saying this is an ark and give at least half of it back to nature. Look at your railway, all the railway lines all along the edges, they need to become arks. The sides of roads, all those industrial brownfield sites. You know, if you go to your schools, all the green mown spaces in between everything, there's no need for them. They can be places for families to live, you know, rooted and unrooted creatures.
I did read on your website as well, something that I thought was quite interesting, especially for people who are gardeners already. And that was about buying plants in to put into your garden. And you talk about sourcing plants that aren't treated with chemicals. So where would we start to look to do that? And what are the problems that are caused by buying in plants that have been treated in that way?
The problems are that a lot of plants are exempt from the neonicotinoid bans in the world of gardening. They have been treated with different chemicals, fungicides, herbicides, and pesticides. Basically, it's how they create a massive amount of one type of plant in one area, and the seeds themselves have often been treated. They're systemic and persistent, and they travel throughout the life cycle of the plant into the pollen stage, which then, when insects come along, they get hurt because they're collecting pollen, which has the pesticide trace in it, if that makes sense. So there is no need to buy in plants, is what I'm saying. People say, what can I plant for my ark? And I'm like, okay, well, you need to go to the website and read the very simple steps involved, because there's no need to plant anything. Planting things, if you understand ecology, which, you know, I barely have an understanding of ecology, so I'm not saying I'm an expert on this, but I understand that if you allow the native seed bank to emerge from the earth, they're the plants that support the local genetic diversity of the insects. They partner with plants. The weeds are the ones that they actually need. They're the ones they need for creating habitat for laying their eggs or for food, or the pollen, the genetic imprint of the different pollens, local plants, is what they thrive on. So if you bring in garden centre plants, you know, yes, they will do well on some of them, but they're not thriving. They're surviving. That's a very different thing. And what we need to do is stop thinking we know best. There's no need to buy anything. You just have to allow the native seed bank to emerge from the earth and stop thinking that we know better.
That's going to be an uphill struggle, I imagine.
Well, it isn't when you start to see what happens. Like almost overnight, all this life comes back in. And it's so empowering and it's so beautiful. And it's just every single creature that arrives back in, you just feel a sense of, you know, it's like you're not doing it for yourself, but we are doing it for our own survival. But it's just incredible. There's such a wonderful feeling that comes with finding a family of hedgehogs, you know, seeing all these weird and wonderful insects suddenly, and or seeing all the birds collecting the amount of insects that they can collect in an ark as opposed to a garden to feed their babies at the moment, you know?
Mm-hmm.
My friend Claire and Joe, they have a forest garden based on one of the gardens from the Garden Awakening book. They also have an ark, and you can follow them on Instagram at Irish Forest Garden. And you can see this incredible little bird box they have, which has a camera in it. We've been watching these birds go from nesting stage up to, you know, they have now their young or getting fed in the nest. It's like the most compelling television. Initially, I was just absolutely terrified because the amount of food they need to keep going to get to feed these little creatures, like they're voracious appetites. I don't know about you, but there's such a lack of insects. I mean, we've lost 75% of the population in the last, 25 years. That's not getting better because the government isn't making any changes. Policy isn't changing. Like, they're still pouring pesticides everywhere. Nothing is going to survive. But these creatures in Claire's garden, because it's an ark, they're getting so much food. And it's very heartening to see that this happens. And it's really exciting. And it really enriches your life. I talk about that in the Garden Awakening book, about how your land is a direct reflection of your own health, mental, physical, emotional. And so if you're nurturing your land, you're giving attention to things within yourself that need nurturing, and it has a huge impact. So it isn't an uphill struggle when you see the impact it has very, very quickly, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So eventually, if I, say, took a portion of my garden and let it just go back to nature, it would, where I am, become oak woodland. And is that the idea, to just let it become what it wants to be?
Yeah. There's words for wilding, rewilding, and that is the idea. But you have to also understand there's a couple of things. Because we've damaged the web of life so much, we have to step in and provide ecosystem services, basically, for the creatures that are now missing from the web of life. So you don't want it to become a dark, heavy, full growth woodland where nothing lives underneath it, you know?
Yeah.
And in small gardens, you're never going to get to that stage anyway. But what you can do is allow one tree in there, you know, at least one tree, preferably an oak in our climate. It's like the top of the chain, like we're the top of the chain, you know, in the plant world. It's different all over the world, of course, but that is the thing. But also at the beginning stages, because we've damaged the land so much, we might need to reboot it. So some land is poisoned or compacted to a point where we have to remove what's there. And so a locally sourced organic native wildflower meadow, or a mix of local weed seeds that you've collected yourself, and throw them in and allow them to come up. And once they get start, everything else will find its way in there. So
there is an element of management. It's just having to be very careful about what you're doing and mindful of your surroundings. Yeah.
For example, invasive plants are going to be a major issue. And I don't like the term invasive plants. They're opportunistic. We've brought them here. It's our fault. But they're all very different all over the world. And it becomes a serious problem on a large scale. But the beauty of the ARK project is that on a small scale, if you've got some land, a garden, a small garden, or a large garden, you are its guardian, and they don't move at 100 miles an hour, you know, unless they're on the riverbank, and then you really have to work hard to get rid of them. But you do have to remove them from your land if you can, because the aim or the goal is to create as strong an ecosystem as possible, support as many creatures as possible, and the plants that will take over are not going to do that. They're not going to allow you to do that. Now, certain ones like Japanese knotweed, they seem to survive quite well unless you attack them, and then they explode. They seem to survive quite well in a community, but it depends. Every situation is different. I can't prescribe what to do. It's not a one-size-fits-all answer. But I do know there's no chemicals allowed in any ark. That time is gone. That has to stop. They create more problems than they solve. So there's a good bit of work involved, but not really. It's like lazy gardening for most people. Stick up a sign and let it go completely wild. It'll be full of brambles and thorny trees before you know it. And it'll be full of all sorts of creatures, which is absolutely wonderful.
So going back to what you said about your garden, and it did start a trend for more wild gardens. So do you think things have improved since you did your garden on the whole, or even on the show garden circuit? Are you confident that we're moving in the right direction?
I think it is moving in the right direction. You see, the problem is it's an industry. Like all of the industries, like the agricultural industry, it has to change. No industry likes change. So it either does something like it becomes entrenched, which I think has become a little bit. It's not fast enough, basically. I mean, 5,000 acres of Ireland's peatlands are being dug up every single year just to support England's peat needs in their gardens alone. Never mind what we're doing to burn it for electricity over here. And the peatlands, they hold more carbon than rainforests. But it's not changing as fast as it needs to. And there's huge opportunities in it to step back and, morph into something else. And I don't know what they are, because I think the whole idea of constant change and constant growth and constant profits, that all has to go. And nobody wants to hear that,
Mm-hmm.
I think surviving on the planet is slightly more important than creating a profitable gardening business. So it has to start changing from the ground up. And I do think it's not as simple as this. Like, we do have to have some kind of a living wage to allow people not to be constantly enslaved and stressed and doing things that they know are damaging the earth because they don't have any choice. They feel they don't have any choice. They're stuck having to just pay the bills. They can't think about anything else. Do you know what I mean? So there's so many people that are in that situation. I mean, I'm not too far off that situation. I struggle. I'm on my own with kids, and it's not easy, but I just can't continue to do what I was doing anymore. So I have to figure something else out. I think we all have to start looking at things like that. It's just not straightforward anymore. So I don't know. I don't think it's changing fast enough.
I was listening to you on another podcast, and you very matter of fact said magic is real, which for some people will come as a surprise that you kind of said that. How does magic manifest in gardens?
Okay, well, it's just an observation of mine. I'm kind of afraid to say these things because people just automatically lump you in with all the kind of self-help gurus that are going around talking about intention and, creating your own reality and all that. But I guess it's something that I knew since I was a kid that we do, and that our thoughts project out and create whatever it is that we're imagining. We imagine stuff that happens. It's that simple, And our gardens are almost like a universal postbox, I guess. That's what I call them. They attract us, these pieces of land. We're attracted to them, whatever way it works. But basically, people are wandering around looking for places to put down their roots because we're just walking plants. And they're attracted to pieces of land that have the same types of damage that we have as individuals, emotional damage, So I always give the example of my own land, which is like, seriously doesn't trust me at all and keeps waiting for me to feck off, And it has serious issues with abandonment and distrust, same as myself. So I give that lots of attention and in the land, and keep working with it and keep explaining to it that I'm not going anywhere. And eventually it starts to trust me, and I start to trust other people as a result. There's such a lot in it. That's why I wrote the book, because I tried to simplify it in a book form. But water is where the magic is held. And so there's these lovely experiments done by a guy who died a few years ago called Dr. Emoto. And he did these water experiments where he said different words, or he wrote words and put them on jars of water, and then he froze them very quickly in a cryogenic chamber, and then he photographed the crystals with different energies, like love had been written on one jar, or hate, or Nigel Farage or Hitler or something on one of the others. And sorry, I tried to be political. Anyway, so the ones that had something horrible written on them, the water was all broken and twisted. And the ones that had beauty or love aimed at them, they had these beautiful shapes. And the water, if you put a drop of the high energy water, like the beauty or the love, into another jar of water, they would all take up the shape of the molecule from the beautiful jar, if you understand what I'm saying. But the point is that water is like the information holder. So if you tell your land what you want to happen there, if you want it to become a place of connection, if you want it to become a healing place, that's the intention you send out, and that's what the water picks up on, and that's held in the land, because the land is like a body. Because the earth is like a heart, a big heart that we used to look after. And then when we started looking at it in terms of ownership instead of in terms of guardianship, the earth got shattered into millions of tiny little pieces. And each one of those pieces is our garden or our land, and it looks to us as its guardian for kind of direction, because it has no control over what happens to it anymore, because we're controlling everything. So it's like a child and a parent, and we're its parent. And if we build up a relationship with it and we support the child to become what it wants to become as opposed to what we think it should be, the magic comes back in ways I find it hard to explain. So I work with my land to help me release stuff. If I have a prayer or a wish that I want to send out, that's where I'll go to do it, because the land will support all that to happen. Magic is, when I say magic, I mean understanding that everything is connected and that your thoughts are connected to everything else. And if you want something to happen, you just need to ask the land to support you.
Thank you very much to Mary for speaking to me when the podcast was still very much in its infancy. And thanks to you for listening. You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website rootsandall.co.uk. Please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support the podcast. Because if you enjoy the show, please help it continue. I also have a GoFundMe where you can make a one-off donation. Even a one-off donation of £1 helps, and I'll be really grateful for your support. So please go to Patreon or GoFundMe and search for Roots and All Podcast.